Welcome to part 2 of The Abolition of Work, an essay by Bob Black. Part 1 is available in episode 19 of the Pernicious Chattel channel, and I recommend watching it before this episode. Today, I am continuing to narrate and comment on this brilliant essay. I hope you follow along and enjoy. Quote, usually, and this is even more true in communist than capitalist countries, where the state is almost the only employer and everyone is an employee, work is employment, i.e. wage labor, which means selling yourself on the installment plan. Thus, 95% of Americans who work for somebody or something else. In the USSR or Cuba or Yugoslavia or any other alternative model which might be adduced, the corresponding figure approaches 100%. Only the embattled third world peasant bastions, Mexico, India, Brazil, Turkey, temporarily shelter significant concentrations of agriculturalists who perpetuate the traditional arrangement of most laborers in the last several millennia. The payment of taxes, ransom, to the state or rent to parasitic landlords in return for being otherwise left alone. Even this raw deal is beginning to look good. All industrial and office workers are employees under the sort of surveillance which ensures servility. But modern work has worse implications. People don't just work, they have jobs. One person does one productive task all the time on a or-else basis. Even if the task has a quantum of intrinsic interest, as increasingly many jobs don't, the monotony of its obligatory exclusivity drains its ludic potential. A job that might engage the energies of some people for a reasonably limited time for the fun of it is just a burden on those who have to do it for 40 hours a week with no say on how it should be done, for the profit of owners who contribute nothing to the project and with no opportunity for sharing tasks or spreading the work among those who actually have to do it. This is the real world of work, a world of bureaucratic blundering, of sexual harassment and discrimination, of boneheaded bosses exploiting and scapegoating their subordinates who, by any rational technical criteria, should be calling the shots. But capitalism in the real world subordinates the rational maximization of productivity and profit to the exigencies of organizational control. The degradation which most workers experience on the job is the sum of assorted indignities which can be denominated as discipline. Foucault has complexified this phenomena, but it is simple enough. Discipline consists of the totality of totalitarian controls at the workplace: surveillance, rote work, imposed work tempos, production quotas, punching in and out, etc. Discipline is what the factory and the office and the store share with the prison and the school and the mental hospital. It is something historically original and horrible. It was beyond the capacities of such demonic dictators of yore as Nero and Genghis Khan and Ivan the Terrible. For all their bad intentions, they just didn't have the machinery to control their subjects as thoroughly as modern despots do. Discipline is the distinctively diabolical modern mode of control. It is an innovative intrusion which must be interdicted at the earliest opportunity. Close quote. Not satisfied with just defining work as unpleasant and unnecessary for the individual, Bob, in this section, expands into how work is actually something much more obscene. That it isn't just distasteful, but it is a form of slavery in all but name. The slavery theme first comes up obviously when he uses the phrase selling yourself on the installment plan. I mean, I guess we could argue over whether it is slavery when you get to keep the money generated from the sale, but the end result is the same. You work at someone else's behest and under conditions that you don't decide. That sale includes sale of personal privacy and of bodily autonomy. Surveillance, for instance, wouldn't be acceptable under any other conditions, at least not overt surveillance, not counting the privacy abuses of the NSA and their Kanzuk collaborators, those limp-dicked security bureaucrats who are just voyeurs with social credibility, sort of like billionaire pedophiles. But at least most of us have the sense to hate those fucks, whereas we generally accept and may even like our bosses, despite the fact we have no right to decide how the work is done or over what period of time, no ability to distribute the work among ourselves the way we want. Not only is this servile, but often we are also victimized as a result of our powerlessness. This servility is painted as necessary because, after all, companies maximize efficiency, regardless of the cost to workers. All the while, this control is centered in the hands of a few bosses, often lacking the skills or knowledge to actually do the work themselves. Their role is often explicitly limited to directing disciplined control. Of course, this is the crux of this excerpt from the essay. When you stand outside of our culture and our definitions, there is really nothing that makes work much different from totalitarianism. Totalitarianism requires total subservience to the state, and work, for the most part, requires something similar from the worker. Well, hold on there, you might say. It isn't as bad as all that. I mean, after all, I'm free to leave whenever I want, and besides, my company makes a concerted effort to make the workplace pretty decent. Again, Bob seems to be a bit ahead of us. He mentions Foucault. Michel Foucault wrote a book called Discipline and Punish: The Birth of the Prisons, where he analyzes the development of the justice system from the 18th century in all its brutality to the much more humanitarian penal system by the 19th. This change is generally presented as an enlightened approach, but Foucault shows how it is actually the application of scientific and technical knowledge to make the prison system better at subjugating inmates. What was changing was the approach, but maintained was the goal. Rather than horrifying torture, the minimum amount of force was applied in carefully planned ways and under strict surveillance, because it was realized that by applying pressure in this way, the control met with less resistance and better compliance was achieved. This made for better prisons, but the same techniques have been applied in every type of modern organization. Foucault suggests that individuality can be shaped by directing many seemingly autonomous people in the same direction. These systems are officially egalitarian, but use discipline to construct non-egalitarian power relations. Observation is used to ensure that subtle pressure applied has a desired effect, and if unsuccessful, can be quickly modified until the result is as desired. You can leave a job, but only if you're willing to give up the salary and other benefits. This is a risky proposition for the individual worker, but relatively less risky for the company. Likewise, you're not forced to put up with a bad boss, but there are lots of disincentives to speak up. Observation is kept discreet, and ideally you don't notice it. Just, security cameras, GPS trackers, clock in and clock out machines, logs of when you connect or disconnect from the server, or databases of every email you've ever written. This is explicitly for your safety, or accurate record keeping, or so on. But at the same time, workers have no illusions. They know that any action management doesn't approve can be caught and discipline will follow. This approach to discipline is applied similarly from our earliest age through parenting and through schooling, churches, or organizations like the Boy Scouts. The intent and the end result is a compliant citizen and workforce that does what power wants. Each individual internalizes the lessons due to early application and endless repetition. Upon reaching adulthood, each adult believes they are disciplining themselves. The whole self-sacrifice, deferral of pleasure, and hard work equals success trope. It is framed as rational choice. Do what is expected to the best of your ability and you will be rewarded. Even more powerfully, brainwash enough people this way and we each become a little policeman ready to berate or rat out our neighbors for their failure to comply. Social control becomes self-sustaining. The end result isn't dissimilar from other types of control, it is actually more effective. Even in moments of abuse, there are people ready to step up and repeat the messages of their masters. The police aren't abusive, they only target the bad guys, or, gasp, people who don't cooperate. State surveillance isn't a bad thing unless you have something to hide. Companies don't want to control their workers, they only need efficiency, productivity, and profit. It protects all of us and our jobs. We have to compete with those nasty Chinese after all. We want you to be yourself, but we'll only employ you if you are a good cultural fit. In effect, you are completely free, as long as you do what is expected in the way expected. Quote, such is work. Play is just the opposite. Play is always voluntary. What might otherwise be play is work, if forced. This is axiomatic. Bernie de Koven has defined play as a suspension of consequences. This is unacceptable if it applies that play is inconsequential. The point is not that play is without consequences. This is to demean play. The point is that the consequences, if any, are gratuitous. Playing and giving are closely related. They are the behavioral and the transactional facets of the same impulse, the play instinct. They share an aristocratic disdain for results. The player gets something out of playing, that's why he plays. But the core reward is the experience of the activity itself, whatever it is. Some otherwise attentive students of play, like Johann Huizinga, Homo Ludens, defines it as game playing or following rules. I respect Huizinga's erudition, but emphatically reject his constraints. There are many good games, chess, baseball, Monopoly, bridge, which are rule-governed, but there is much more to play than game playing. Conversation, sex, dancing, travel, these practices aren't rule-governed, but they are surely play if anything is, and the rules can be played with at least as readily as anything else. Work makes a mockery of freedom. The official line is that we all have rights and live in a democracy. Other unfortunates who aren't free like we are have to live in police states. These victims obey orders or else, no matter how arbitrary. The authorities keep them under regular surveillance. State bureaucrats control even the smallest details of everyday life. The officials who push them around are answerable only to their higher-ups, public or private. Either way, dissent and disobedience are punished. Informers report regularly to the authorities. All this is supposed to be a very bad thing. And so it is, although it is nothing but a description of the modern workplace. The liberals and the conservatives and libertarians who lament totalitarianism are phonies and hypocrites. There is more freedom in any moderately de-Stalinized dictatorship than there is in the ordinary American workplace. You find the same sort of hierarchy and discipline in an office or a factory as you do in a prison or a monastery. In fact, as Foucault and others have shown, prisons and factories came in at about the same time, and their operators consciously borrowed from each other's control techniques. A worker is a part-time slave. The boss says when you show up, when you leave, and what to do in the meantime. He tells you how much work to do and how fast. He is free to carry his control to humiliating extremes, regulating, if he feels like it, the clothes you wear and how often you go to the bathroom. With a few exceptions, he can fire you for any reason or no reason. He has you spied on by snitches and supervisors. He amasses a dossier on every employee. Talking back is called insubordination. just as if a worker is a naughty child. And it not only gets you fired, it disqualifies you for unemployment compensation. Without necessarily endorsing it for them either, it is noteworthy that children at home and in school receive much the same treatment, justified in their case by their supposed immaturity. What does this say about their parents and their teachers who work? Close quote. Once again, Bob reappropriates a word we've turned into a disparagement when it had none of the same moral implications in its original form. Play has become an important developmental phase in children's life, at least according to the experts. As such, there are attempts to encourage play in children and incorporate it into education. This is especially disturbing when you consider what schooling has been directed at accomplishing, turning individual children into a collectively skilled and compliant workforce. In this way, modernity has very much subverted instinctual human behavior into something quite the opposite. But our author is acting to reclaim it by clarifying that play should not have objective consequences. It exists as a result of our humanity, and it needs no reason to exist beyond that. Bob takes this definition and gives it a more meaningful twist by saying that play is associated with the act of giving. In this way, it is both human and humane. The only reward is in the experience. It is in the nature of the experience itself where we can find another horrifying element of work. Think of all the hours spent at work, commuting, cleaning your clothes, preparing your meals, resting your body. The total amount of hours you spent working or preparing to work. Now add the 20 to 30 years you spent in school to achieve minimum qualifications for work. How much of that time added any value whatsoever to your life? How much of your average workday is worth telling your grandchildren about? How much of your workday is meaningful in any way? If you are like most of us, not much. Most of what you've spent your life doing has added very little to the world. What experiences have you had sitting day after day behind that desk, counter, deep fryer, or steering wheel? Would you show up in one place day after day if you didn't have to? Of course not. Every hour of every workday is an hour of lost human experience. If every second of the workday is a grain of sand through an hourglass, then your career is an entire desert of lost time. Humans are a highly sensitive, perceiving and experiencing organism, perhaps the most finely tuned and most sensitive animal to have ever walked this earth. We can perceive the transcendent beauty of a Mozart sonata. We can use our intelligence and efforts to understand the complexity of the universe. We can be overcome by the supreme wonder of our planet. We can feel tremendous love for one another. We can build magnificent buildings and paint stunning art. But how do we spend our time? Restocking another shelf with discount toilet paper? What a horrible, awful, and evil sacrifice. The middle of the above passage has focused on the totalitarian nature of the workplace, but the end returns to childish things. Bob draws a very direct line between how a worker is controlled, manipulated, and disciplined, and how a school or parent controls children. This immediately brings us back to the infantilizing nature of our modern world. Adults are treated as children, and children indoctrinated into a depraved vision of adulthood. Both are denied access to their natural human instincts to play and to experience our world in a joyful, voluntary, and human way. And that is the end of part 2. Thanks for watching. I will be trying to launch the remaining parts of narration and commentary on a semi-weekly basis. Subscribe if you'd like to be notified. Thumbs up if you enjoyed it or want to share this essay. This is XCG wishing you speed, ease, and success on your journey to freedom.